Hello, my name is Toshiko Tanaka. I survived 1945's atomic bombing in Hiroshima. Hibakusha is how we call all the survivors in Japanese. I've been creating enamel mural artwork for over 50 years. It wasn't easy for me to talk about what I am going to tell you today. I try not to remember what happened in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. I thought people would not understand me. Anyway, I was not able to talk to anybody about my personal experience of atomic bombing, not even to my own family. I started to open up and share how horrible and devastating it was to be a victim of the war when I turned 70. It is a miracle for me to be able to tell you my story today. Hopefully, we are all here to stop something like this from ever happening again. My family lived only about 500 meters from ground zero, where the center of the bomb hit. Luckily, 1 week before the A-bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, we moved to a town 2.3 kilometers away from ground zero. My family made a lucky choice, otherwise I wouldn't be here. However, I was still burnt and exposed to radiation. That gigantic mushroom cloud formed right above me when I was only 6 years old. I was on my way to school around 8 o'clock in the morning. Somebody shouted, "B-29, the enemy bomber!" at 8:15 a.m. I looked up the sky and saw a tremendous flash, as strong as several thousand strobe lights flashing at once. Everything went white, and I couldn't see. At once, I covered my face with my right arm. Heat burned my head, the left part of my neck, and my right arm. A few moments later, everything was covered in darkness, as dark as night time. Heated sun dust blew up into the air and covered the entire sun. I couldn't see because of the dust, but the shape of the cloud looked like a gigantic mushroom. Standing under that cloud, not knowing what was going on, my mouth was full of sun dust, and my mind went blank. I was burnt and exposed to radiation. I still remember vividly the eerie crunchiness of the sun taste in my mouth. Soon my burnt arm began to swell. I felt unbearable pain. I cried my way home, only to find that our house was mostly destroyed. But I was so grateful to find out that my mother was unharmed. My mother told me that she could not recognize me. My hair was shrunken from the heat. My body and ragged clothes were entirely covered with ashes, and my face had totally changed. That night, I was in a serious condition. I had a high fever and became unconscious. My mother thought I was not going to make it. Many doctors had died, and the hospitals were destroyed. There was no way for her to get any form of medical treatment for me. Whether we lived or died was entirely up to one's physical vigor and luck. My 2 years younger sister was deeply cut on her forehead by shattered glass pieces, and she was bleeding. My father had been drafted away into the army and was not present at the time. I remember going into the house and seeing through our largely damaged roof. A small patch of blue sky. Although I was crying in pain, I thought it was so beautiful. The impression of the blue sky sunk deep inside of me. It had encouraged me to live even until today. It was as if the heavens gave me hope, saying, "Don't worry, there will be a tomorrow." Maybe it is this hope that keeps me living my life positively, even through hardship. One single bomb only took 1 second to wipe out the whole city of Hiroshima and took away 210,000 lives. 140,000 dead bodies in Hiroshima that day, and 70 more in Nagasaki, just like this. All of my former classmates were killed. My aunt in her 20s, who left home earlier that morning, never returned. We have never even seen her body. All the images of the bombing scene have stayed in my mind since I woke up from that horrible nightmare. My generation will be the last to tell you about this event as direct witnesses. After I got home that day, I saw a large crowd of people on the verge of death, trying to escape in a line near my house. Young orphan children were also following this crowd. Most of these people, even young women, were nearly naked with burnt clothes. They were silent, with outstretched arms. At the tips of their fingers dangled the burnt and peeled skin of their upper lips. They looked like they are possessed by ghosts. Even today, every time I see barbecued tomatoes, that scene flashes back to me with goosebumps. Like barbecued tomatoes, human skin peels off easily when heated. Then something weird started to happen. Suddenly, people who were not burned or injured started to die, one after another in front of our house. It was not known then the damage of radiation, and apparently these people had been exposed to massive amounts of radioactivity. Exactly how much radiation the air bombs produced is still unknown. I have another strong memory of that time. I was unconscious for a few days, but what woke me up was a strong smell. It was like burning rotten fish. It was so strong that it has stayed in my nose until now. The smell wasn't fish. It was thousands of corpses being burned in the neighboring parks and the school grounds. Even though it was a time of great difficulty while I was unconscious, my mother still sheltered many escaping people in our house. One of them was her cousin, Kenzo Matsuki. He came to our house with a burnt bucket containing the skull of the woman he wished to bury. The skull belonged to a woman who was stuck under her destroyed house and cruelly burnt alive. We had thought the woman was his mother, but recently a memo by Kenzo was found that explained the woman was actually his aunt, who was living with him at the time of the bombing. After finding this out, I started to feel urgency toward doing as accurate research as possible on the damage after the bomb while hibakusha are still alive. Among these escaping people, I also remember a 15-year-old girl who carried her severely burned younger sister on her back and came to our house. Later, I heard the burned girl survived, but an injured girl died shortly after. She had been exposed to a lethal amount of radioactivity. My husband's uncle was an English teacher of this school, Jogakui, and a devout Christian. He used to paint beautiful pictures and sought peace from his heart. But the bomb killed him and his 6 family members, including his newly born baby. Grieving their loss, my husband adopted his uncle's family name, Tanaka. My husband has now died, but I still carry this last name, Tanaka. There were 12 young American war prisoners in Hiroshima at the time the bomb was dropped. They were all killed as well. Even though the bomb was dropped by their own country, what a tragedy is war, that without mercy, it led Americans to kill even their own people. As time passed, the burns on my skin became less visible, but the emotional wounds and the damage from the radioactivity remained. Do you know the story of Sadako and her paper cranes? Sadako was 4 years younger than me, and we went to the same secondary school, Noborimachi. She survived the atomic bomb when she was 2 years old, but the effect of radioactivity led her to die of leukemia at the age of 12. Sadako was not the only one. There were many people who died of leukemia in Hiroshima those days. In my case, the symptoms started when I was an early teen. The doctors said my white blood count was abnormal. I suffered constant light fever and fatigue, and from time to time fainted. I always had mouth ulcers and blotches around my mouth, which hampered me in swallowing food. Even today, when I am very tired, I have sores too painful to fall asleep. I sometimes bleed from my colon, but the cause is unknown. When I was younger, I had several bone fractures and had surgery on my knee. I also had surgery to remove cataract from both my eyes. The Japanese government drew a 2-kilometer radius circle from Hiroshima's ground zero. They said, if you survived within this circle, your diseases are certified as airborne sickness. However, in my case, none of the symptoms are certified because I survived just 300 meters outside of the circle. Even though it was a time of great difficulty, some entered lawsuits claiming that the influence of radiation should not be certified according to a circle of range. This is because there would have been atmospheric influences such as winds. Instead of spending massive time and labor on a lawsuit, I decided to spend the rest of my life dedicated to my art and testimony. For more than 6 years after the end of the war, the American government concealed the radioactivity damage by blocking out the media. Those days the country was competing against the USSR in its nuclear arms development and wanted to carry out numerous nuclear tests. It was also developing nuclear power generation under the name of peaceful utilization. So the damage caused by radioactivity was an uncomfortable truth for the government. In the meantime, hibakusha were widely discriminated against in Japanese society. In particular, women were treated badly when they married, due to the fact that their babies were often born with defects. Fortunately, I was able to marry and had a happy family life. My husband didn't mind that I was a hibakusha. However, I remember the time when our first child was born. He seriously checked out the baby's fingers and toes. Then I realized that he had been worried about the damage of the bone on our baby. Not just my husband, but all parents those days were worried. Up until now, there still had not been enough research on the impact of radioactivity on the second generation. No doctors can give any legitimate diagnosis. There is no proof that the second generation can maintain their health. The hibakusha continue to feel sorry for their children and have to carry this psychological burden for their entire life. Before the bomb, our family line generally had been blessed with good health. However, after the bomb, 3 of my sister's daughters, who were second-generation hibakusha, were afflicted with thyroid disease. One of them had surgery to remove thyroid cancer at the age of 22. My younger brother, who is also a second-generation hibakusha, had surgery to remove colon cancer when he was still quite young. Doctors say there is no evidence to connect these diseases to the airborne. But we hibakusha have always felt the high possibility that there are side effects of bombing. On March 11th, 2011, there were a series of incidents at the nuclear power plant in Fukushima. I feel deep sympathy towards those who are suffering in Fukushima and feel a great regret for not having done more until recently. Our government has not learned either from the atomic bomb, from the tragedy on Daigo Fukuryumaru, or from the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Daigo Fukuryumaru was a tuna fishing boat whose 23 crew members were exposed to nuclear fallout. Whose 23 fallout from a nuclear test carried out by the US in 1954 at Bikini Atoll. Instead, the Japanese government continues to produce radioactive substances, which will produce even more hibakusha. Doing so, they are also depriving their own citizens of food and peace to live. We do not know when the disaster in Fukushima will end. I feel a strong urge to learn why these things are happening. Since 2007, I have made 3 round-the-world voyages on Peace Boat, which is sponsored by a Japan-based international NGO. I learned more about the situation of the world during these voyages. I have visited more than 70 countries, including the ones that are suffering tragic wars and the ones that suffer damages from climate change. In 2012, I joined the Peace Boat project to visit the areas damaged by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster in Ukraine and its neighboring country, Belarus. At the Chernobyl plant, the commission works have been going on for nearly 30 years. Since 2009, I have shared my testimony with students in high schools and colleges in New York and Oklahoma to support a nuclear-free world. During the testimony, I sometimes use my enamel mural artworks. My visit to the U.S. started when Dr. Kathleen Sullivan and Mr. Robert Cronquist kindly invited me and gave me the opportunity. They are the founders of an NGO affiliated with the United Nations Department of Public Information. Their program, Hibakusha Stories, has reached over 30,000 students and citizens in various schools and organizations, including my last 10 visits in 6 years. In these meetings, people often ask me why Japan has made so many nuclear power plants, even though it was a victim of nuclear weapons. Every time this happened, I have utterly no response. During the post-war years of recovery, our policymakers launched a propaganda campaign stating that nuclear energy was a peaceful utilization and dream energy. The citizens must have convinced themselves to believe in this. The biggest problem was that the general public was indifferent to the policies, and soon there were 54 nuclear reactors in our narrow, quake-prone country. Our government should have taken much more time to discuss things with its people. 12 days after Fukushima disaster, I have an opportunity to meet Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York. That meeting was not set to discuss Fukushima, but I still told him in person. I said, as a survivor of a nuclear bomb, I cannot bear to see any more hibakusha made, regardless of whether it is due to nuclear weapons or peaceful utilization. Please urge the world to switch to renewable energy. Although his attitude seemed very sincere to me, Mr. Ban Ki-moon did not give me a specific reply. Later, I took part in a campaign in which we visited local administrative chiefs throughout Japan and collected their signatures agreeing to support the anti-nuclear policy. I also created an art piece for an anti-nuclear art book project. To tell you the truth, until this project, in my 50-year enamoring career, I had not been able to face up to my survival experience. Until then, all I did was, in a very subtle and abstract way, insert into my works some anti-nuclear symbols. This was done in order to soothe my soul. So it did not matter if others understood them. But today, I feel responsible and have a sense of mission to deliver a message of peace through my artwork. One day, a junior high school student in New York City asked me why I made friends with Americans, even though I was nearly killed by the album. My answer was this. During the war, Japanese people were taught to believe that all Westerners were demons. In the beginning, it was very hard to forgive them for all the sufferings caused by the bomb. But I now believe that hatred only creates a chain of hatred, and it will eventually lead to killings and destruction by war. Humankind needs to make every effort to cut off this chain of hatred, and instead have love toward humanity as a whole. So I have one request for young people. Please go out and make close friends throughout the world. Please choose the path to coexist regardless of your differences, including nationality and race. If in the future there are disputes among the nations, please try to solve them by persistent talks instead of words. Once we start wars, we can only see each other as enemies, not as humans. And we kill enemies with ease. Nuclear weapons will lead the Earth to destruction. They are inhumane and should never have been allowed on Earth. In America, during World War II, the leader of the time decided to drop atomic bombs without a second thought. He said it was necessary in order to end the war quickly. But the real reason for Hiroshima and Nagasaki was to send a message to the USSR. The leader who made the decision to drop the bombs was then US President Harry Truman. One of the soldiers who dropped the bombs from the Enola Gay bomber was Jacob Biza. You know what? Their grandsons, Mr. Clifton Truman and Mr. Ali Biza, are good friends of mine today. Both Clifton and Ali are working very hard towards nuclear abolishment and creating world peace. If we still in war, these good people and I would be enemies. Clifton and Ali have also been on board the peace boat to promote peace twice. If we have close friends from around the world, we will think twice before starting wars that just seek personal prosperity and supremacy. I believe this sense of hesitation is part of all of us, and that it is an essential trait for policy makers and citizens alike. So I ask you, please make many friends from other countries. When you do so, you are moving the world towards peace. There are many people working for a nuclear-free world. For instance, ICAN is a global campaign to promote all countries to initiate negotiations for a treaty banning nuclear weapons. I wish with all my heart that one day soon, while I am still alive, the United Nations will set a treaty banning nuclear weapons, and the world can take the essential step in need towards world peace. I hope the nation throughout the world ban nuclear weapons so the global atmosphere will not be contaminated in the future, and a beautiful blue sky will continue to shine above the heads of our future generation. Thank you for your kind attention.